Sometimes, the biggest revolutions begin in the quietest places. Not in glass offices or tech campuses, but behind cafe counters, during night shifts, and in moments of silent exhaustion. This is not a story about luck or shortcuts. This is a story about persistence, discipline, and a girl who refused to accept the life she was given. This is the story of how one decision, one laptop, and countless late nights changed everything. She used to wake up before dawn, when the city was still half asleep and the streets smelled of yesterday's rain and fresh bread from bakery on the corner. Her name was Anna, and at 21, her world consisted of a small rented room, a cracked phone screen, and a waitress uniform that never quite lost the scent of coffee. Every morning, she tied her hair into a neat ponytail, forced a smile onto her face, and told herself that today would be easier than yesterday. It rarely was. The cafe was loud, crowded, and unforgiving. Customers snapped their fingers, complained about cold cappuccinos, and left tips that barely covered the bus ride home. But Anna learned something important there: how to observe people, how to listen, and how to endure. During slow hours, when the espresso machine hissed softly and sunlight spilled across empty tables, she would pull out her old laptop. It was heavy, slow, and missing 2 keys, but it was her window into another life. She had discovered programming almost by accident. One night, after a particularly brutal shift, she had searched online for ways to change her life. She clicked on a free course titled Introduction to Programming, without really knowing what it meant. The first time she saw lines of code appear on the screen and actually do something, she felt a spark she had never felt before. It was as if the chaos of the cafe had been replaced by logic, structure, and possibility. At first, it was hard. Extremely hard. She didn't have a technical background, and words like algorithm and a data structure sounded like a foreign language. After 10-hour shifts on her feet, her eyes burned as she stared at the screen late into the night. There were moments when she cried quietly so her roommates wouldn't hear, moments when she almost closed the laptop and decided that this dream was too big for someone like her. But every small victory kept her going. The first program that ran without errors. The first problem she solved completely on her own. Each success whispered, "You belong here." Her days became a strange balance between 2 worlds. In the cafe, she memorized orders and smiled through exhaustion. At night, she memorized syntax and debugged mistakes. While others spent their tips on parties or new clothes, Anna saved every spare coin. She knew she would need money for better internet, for books, for courses, for a future she could almost see but not yet touch. Friends didn't always understand her obsession. Some laughed and said programming was for geniuses, not waitresses. Others warned her that it was too late to start, that companies would never take her seriously. Anna listened, nodded, and then went back to her laptop. Months passed, then years. She switched from free tutorials to more advanced courses, learned multiple programming languages, and built small projects that she was secretly proud of. A simple website. A to-do app. A tiny game that made her laugh when it worked. She began posting her code online, asking questions, and receiving feedback from people all over the world. For the first time, her world felt bigger than the cafe. It felt global. The turning point came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Anna had applied for dozens of junior developer positions, expecting nothing. Rejection emails had become familiar companions. But this time, an email arrived that made her hands shake. A small startup was inviting her to an interview. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was modest, but it was a chance. She spent nights preparing, practicing answers, reviewing code, and imagining every possible question. When the interview day came, she wore her simplest, cleanest clothes and spoke honestly about her journey. She didn't pretend to be perfect. She talked about being a waitress, about learning at night, about failing and trying again. A week later, she got the job. Leaving the cafe was both terrifying and exhilarating. On her last day, she served coffee with a smile that felt different. She knew she was closing one chapter of her life and opening another. The office was small, noisy, and full of people who seemed impossibly smart. At first, Anna felt like an imposter. She worried that someone would discover she didn't belong. But day by day, line by line of code, she proved to herself that she did. She asked questions. She made mistakes. She fixed them. Her past had taught her resilience, and it showed. As her skills grew, so did her confidence. She changed jobs, moved to bigger companies, and worked on projects that reached thousands, then millions of users. She learned to speak up in meetings, to defend her ideas, and to mentor others who reminded her of herself. Recruiters began to notice her. Opportunities came from places she had once only read about. When an offer from a major tech company in Silicon Valley arrived, Anna stared at the screen for a long time. The words felt unreal. Silicon Valley had always sounded like a myth, a distant land where only the best of the best belonged. She thought about the cafe, the early mornings, the late nights, and the laptop with missing keys. She thought about the girl who had once been afraid to dream too big. And then she said yes. Moving to California was like stepping into another universe. The buildings, the people, the pace of life, everything was faster, brighter, louder. The work was challenging, sometimes overwhelming, but Anna thrived on it. She collaborated with some of the smartest minds in the industry, worked on cutting-edge technology, and saw her code shape products used around the world. There were still hard days, days filled with doubt and pressure, but she knew how to survive them. She had survived much worse. Years later, standing in a glass-walled office overlooking the valley, Anna sometimes caught her reflection in the window. She no longer wore a waitress uniform. She no longer worried about tips or rent. But she hadn't forgotten. She remembered the cafe, the exhaustion, the fear, and the stubborn hope that had carried her forward. She remembered because it kept her grounded. Because it reminded her that talent can come from anywhere, and that beginnings do not define endings. When people asked her about her success, she never called it luck. She talked about discipline, about consistency, about believing in yourself when no one else does. She talked about learning every day and not being ashamed of where you start. And somewhere, in a small cafe in a quiet city, another tired waitress might hear her story and open an old laptop, ready to change her life, just like Anna once did. Her journey was never about becoming famous or proving something to the world. It was about proving something to herself. That no matter where you start, no matter how small or invisible your life feels right now, you have the power to change it. Dreams don't care about your past, they only respond to action. And somewhere tonight, in a quiet room, someone is opening a laptop for the first time, ready to rewrite their own destiny.